that first gave me the passion for VFX. So today I'm really happy to be a teaching assistant at VFX Apprentice too. So today we're not going to be talking about the greatest tech, the new breakthrough in VFX, but we've got good experience bringing new VFX artists into the industry. And we want to share a bit the state of what it is to be a real-time VFX artist in the industry today. So we'll start first with the VFX artist as a whole in the industry, what it is today to be a VFX artist and what it looks like for studios. Then we'll look at who actually are VFX artists. So where do they come from? What skills did they start with? And then we'll look at the journey. How do you go from your first ever VFX to your first ever job? And then at the end, we'll look a bit into the future, saying what we can do, how we can improve on VFX training for new VFX artists. So let's start there. What's the job like? What does it look like day to day? Well, at the start, we'll start with artists. So artists, they have a lot of tools to learn. VFX in general has a lot of different parts, moving parts around, and you don't need all of them. But you need to learn first an engine. There's multiple engines that are multiple standards for the industry. That's normal. But then you get into getting 3D software, getting painting skills, painting tools, making sims for flipbooks for realistic games, making pyros, making actual simulations in Houdini, etc. The list goes on, and that's a large volume of new tools to learn every time. So that's often a bit of a burden, but tools have never been easier to learn than before, and they've been ever more ergonomic, and there's so many more resources online. So in the end, that's a big improvement to what it was before. And then second part is VFX artists often are quite alone in their little team. There's often one or two in a studio, no more. And so that makes it hard to work with the workload. If you're away, you go from 100% of productivity to 0%. It's hard to bring a new artist in the industry because, well, training the junior also takes some time. And that's just one artist alone. But in the end, you're not quite alone because you work with everyone else. VFX is very integrated. You work with animators to make it match. You work with concept artists to work at the start. You work with gameplay and designers to try and create an effect that best represents what the effect is supposed to be. So in the end, you're never really alone. You're always working with so many other people.
There's also the matter of like who you're working with, right? Like Gabriel's saying, but also what you're working on. And in like unavoidably, always you have the technical side of what you're working on and the artistic side. And as a VFX artist, it's definitely a blend, and all of us fall differently on that blend. When we're talking about technical, one way to think of it is like, all these really complex systems and tools that you have to work with, and then the art skills that you need to be able to like create something that fits a style that has a very distinct visual impression that it makes. And this is another way to think of that division, right? With the technical side of things, you've got all these tools and the way that you do it. And then on the artistic side, you have the way you do it from like your creative standpoint, regardless of the tool that you're using. How is it that you get creative? And here's some more visualization on kind of what we mean when we say technical and artistic. Again, it's kind of hard to break it into two clear categories because everything on the left has artistry to it and everything on the right has technical like methodology behind it that actually helps it get created. So as an artist, this is another big consideration that you have to take into mind. Another thing to consider is not only what the artists go through and what they have to work on, now that we've talked a little bit about that, but also what are studios going through? So we've kind of outlined just a few of the challenges of being an artist, like straddling this line between art skills and tech skills, and how do you get there, right? But then what are studios experiencing and what does the industry look like to them? So right now, there's a big challenge for studios. If any of you are familiar with this as a hiring manager or as a lead or even a senior artist that has been involved with hiring other effects artists, then you know this is a challenge and you know that there is a great big need right there in the industry. So we took some statistics from the United States Bureau for Labor Statistics on new VFX jobs this year. This is based on the growth rate that we've seen in past years and how many there were at the beginning of the year, about how many we could expect to see this year, even with COVID and all of the craziness going on. Well, as you might know, the games industry is growing, and so are jobs for effects. This also includes jobs for television and film, but you can imagine that games probably takes the majority of that, given that the games industry is just so massive and still growing. So given this high demand, there must be tons of schools racing to meet that demand and getting their students really great jobs, right? So how many schools could we expect in the United States to have degrees available teaching real-time VFX for games? Well, there's actually none. Unfortunately, this graph here, I think, kind of says it all. There's a huge pain point. There's a massive issue right now that we don't have enough VFX artists. And I've tried to say this in a lot of different ways and a lot of different forums, but I'm going to say it again. Now is a great time to be an effects artist. You are in such high demand. It is crazy. Obviously, this is the United States, but you could extrapolate for other countries such as New Zealand exactly like what that might be in your specific territory. The point is the demand is super high. So that's one challenge, and we could probably stop there. But there's more challenges that studios have to work with when it comes to hiring VFX artists. Also, these artists, I mentioned on the previous slide that there's a lot of training overhead. That kind of ties into this as well, where if the talent pool is not very deep, then you end up needing to train them yourself. Well, that's another big challenge with effects specifically because we work so closely, as Gabriel was mentioning, with other types of art. And we're going to talk more about this down the line as well. This becomes even more challenging with remote training and the proprietary tools that studios have to work with in a work from home environment. And then, of course, needs are always evolving. Next gen consoles are coming out every generation. Go figure. So the need to stay current on that tech side of things that we mentioned is always present, even for those who index more on the artistic side of things.
For sure. Yeah, that's a lot of stuff. So that's what a VFX artist looks like in the industry today. That's honestly pretty good. Things are going well. So where do VFX artists come from? So we'll look at this now. From the VFX Apprentice stats, we can see that half of the students here, so that's a small sample, but still, half of the students come from the games industry. All right, so they're already in the games industry and they're using this as a sort of second job. It's often easier to actually get a job as a VFX artist when you already have some experience. And that ties back up to this idea that having already experience in something else makes it easier to have this perfect 50-50 of art and tech we were talking about before. 1/5 of the students come from art school. They're already in the art school and they want to complement their skills with to get the VFX job. What's important here is that usually art schools in general ask you to specialize at some point into either tech or art. So that makes it hard also to get the 50-50. Finally, 1/3 about of them are self-taught, coming from other industries. So either they just got out of studies or they had a job before and now it's there. And those, a lot of them are devs, just developers that want to get into the games industry. So there's really no wrong point to get into VFX. There's a lot of ways to get there. And what's really important is to know what transferable skills exist. How can you actually use the previous experience you had? Because that's what's valuable and that's what makes you a very different VFX artist. So if you're an animator, you're probably really good with meshes and with bones. So you can start with that and make great effects just with that. If you're a concept artist, you're going to make great hand-painted textures. If you're a tech artist or a dev, probably using more noise, creating shaders. If you're a photographer, you will have a great idea of composition, shape language. 2D animators will have, of course, all the advantages there, mostly principles, like high principles and great timing. The list goes on. So we're talking about that, but let's go a bit on my journey and then Jason's journey. So where did I start? And what skills did I have at the start? Well, as I said, I was an engineer before. So as a kid, I grew up loving drawing, loving video games, loving just playing in general, but I never thought it could be my job. Never. I went to engineering school telling myself, in the day, I'll work. In the evening, I'll play D&D. And then I worked as a C# dev for 3 years on frankly awesome jobs. And all my colleagues were telling me, oh, this is really great. But it wasn't for me. It wasn't working. And my boss saw that. And at the end of the project, they told me, you know what? You're probably going to be happier working in video games. And all my friends told me the same. So I said, okay, I'll learn Unity. So I started trying to learn Unity. So in April 2019, I had learned Unity. I knew the things. I knew enough to navigate. And I discovered VFX. And I made my first ever VFX. 7 months later, I got my first job. I worked about 12 hours a day on my own at my home, just getting the work in, learning this, honing the skills, and then make a portfolio and hunting for the job. So on the left here, you can see the 2 best pieces I had at the time when I got the job in my portfolio. And then on the right, you can see the art test I made for the first job that I barely got. I was first said, no, sorry, you can't come. And then I was called back and told, okay, sure, we'll try. We were actually looking for 2 people anyway. So it was close. So I'm self-taught. As we can see with the transferable skills we talked about before, I have strong tech skills. I knew a lot about math, vectors. I had also a good idea of how fluid simulation worked. I had a good idea of how materials worked internally. All those skills were skills I could use to make more believable VFX and to help me in my less than optimal artistic skills when I started.
So
One
for
of the
me,
big, it's good. Everything's fine. One of the big helpers that I had there at the time was the community. Especially the real-time VFX community was awesome. It really helped me out giving feedback because at the time I couldn't see what was good and what was bad. I met awesome people, industry veterans that were just there to give feedback and help out new like me. I also use Twitter. I know Twitter is usually bad for you, but it was there for me at that time to be a great source of inspiration, of community, and just to motivate me. I did weekly posts, and I met a lot of people and that are today great friends just through Twitter. So I highly suggest it too. I still do breakdowns of some of the effects you can see here on my Twitter. And then 1 year after I got my first job, I got contacted by Jason, and he offered me the possibility of being a teaching assistant, and that's where I started to give back to the community.
I'm so sorry I cut you off.
It's okay, don't worry, no problem. I had
Pause.
small problem with my headphones.
So
It's all good.
I'm like, I want to talk about me. He's talked about himself enough. Let's go over to my side.
Yeah. I mean,
so
it's
bad.
really interesting. So
No, it's great. So my story is quite different from Gabriel's. We've rehearsed this before, I promise. But my story is quite different where he came from more of like a technical side. I started more artistic. And it's funny because I was trying to find my old embarrassing drawings from college. These are not those drawings. These are early, but this is after I filled up a couple of sketchbooks just full of terrible, terrible sketches. So the story here is that I loved to draw in high school and middle school and grade school, honestly, but that I never really got serious about it until college, meaning I never really started drawing every day until college, because now it was time to get into an animation program, and I learned that I wasn't as good as my mother had said I was growing up at drawing. And so you can see here, based on what you're observing from my old sketchbooks, that I drew a lot of people, just like people out in public, walking around on the college campus with their backpacks. We would take turns posing. We would grab like a room, and like all of us pre-major students would get into the room and just draw each other. So you see like random people here, just these are my classmates. And, just at lunch, I'd be like eating with one hand and drawing with another. There's a guy carrying his food and just walking around. So I just drew constantly. And this was so that I could get into the animation program, right? Well, it continued even after getting accepted with my sort of raw drawing skills. I continued practicing and took about 9 figure drawing classes, if I remember correctly. I think I've tallied it many times before. This is years ago, but about 9 figure drawing classes. So think about just drawing people in bikinis and naked people for 9 semesters. That's what I was doing in college. But of course, I was doubling them up in order to get it done in a 4-year degree. But also studying a lot of 3D along the way. Wasn't really my cup of tea at first. I think I was gravitating more towards the like traditional arts at that time. But from there, I decided for sure, I wanted to be like a character animator or storyboard artist. And that was really my focus for a while. You see on the right here a little animatic that I did of kids playing. And on the left, you see like a character animation piece where he's saying, curds. And it's super derpy and dumb. They're both kind of derpy and dumb. And I had a lot of fun making them, and I think I really enjoyed it. But it dawned on me gradually that maybe I wasn't going to be good enough to do this. And I was starting to get kind of worried. And all the time, I just kind of kept with the things that I sort of took naturally to or had some good skill and proficiency in, which was 2D animation, right? That was sort of it for me. Well, fast forward to a few months later, and one of my faculty members was Ryan Woodward. And Ryan Woodward, you may know, is well known in the industry for his effects animation and his storyboard skills. He's worked on a lot of films. And the guy can kind of do everything in the 2D animation pipeline with a bunch of 3D skills mixed in. So he was amazing. And he had me do some in-between animation as a student on this piece here on the left. And I just absolutely fell in love. This was so much fun. This was for the night show at the Polynesian Cultural Center in Hawaii, where they have like the big tapa cloth on a big canvas, and there's all these different shots that they had for it. But anyway, as I was doing the in-between frames of his animation, I just fell in love. I realized that this was way more fun for me than character work had ever been. It was super satisfying and intuitive, and I just enjoyed it a lot more. Well, then you see my student film on the top right. This was the first shot that I did for the film after kind of storyboarding it out and laying out the character designs and everything else. And I was off to the races at that point. I mean, I had a few other pieces as well that I had sketched out and cleaned up digitally. And that landed me my first job, which you see down here at the bottom. This was my first stable job, I should say. I had other odd jobs before that, like the one for working with Ryan. But by this point, it was just obvious to me. I'm an effects guy. I just love effects. And, I'm going to take what I learned from sketching characters and drawing good proportions and perspective and all that, and just apply that to effects. And so I did. And while I was working on this game called Animal Jam, that these first two are from here, I also did a lot of freelance work, which is what you see on the right there. That's one example of some of the work where I was just kept that momentum going from school. I kind of started out school really slow, but I finished really strong. And that's a good lesson. If you ever want the full story, I've shared that before on other outlets. But basically, yeah, I started super artistic and then gradually started learning these more digital skills to the point where I had a lot of really good 2D effects work. and caught the attention of Riot Games. And they said, let's have you do an art test because we don't do 2D effects so much, but we need someone with that skill that can come help our 3D effects team sort of infuse that sensibility into there. That was kind of the plan, at least. And it was kind of embarrassing. So I applied and I did this art test for them. And you see on the right, the Unreal Engine art test, which is just so terrible. At the time, I was even not sure how to screen capture. I left the menu on here on purpose because like I didn't even know how to do like a more specific screen capture, and I kind of wanted to show off how fancy my 3 emitter particle system was at the time. And I was embarrassed, to be honest. I don't think I was as embarrassed as I should have been, though. Like looking back now, I'm really embarrassed. At the time, I didn't even know really how bad it was. I was that bad. And I did this thing on the left to show like, I really do know how to do effects, I promise, and really put my whole heart into this art test. Well, later I found out that internally, most of the team hated it. And they're like, I don't think we should hire this guy. There's no way. He's not going to go anywhere with effects. But one person, specifically the hiring manager that was working with me, her name is Christina1, and you ought to go watch her talk at GDC that she gave. I think it's free online now. She talks about this art test. She fought for me, and she said, no, he's going to get there. And I'm so grateful that she did because she really put her neck out for me. She saw the raw potential in my traditional skills, and she said, he's going to learn the technical skills. He's going to learn what he needs in order to function on our team. And turns out she was right because I ended up having a fantastic time on League of Legends. For about 3 to 6 months, I kind of floundered, if I'm being honest, sort of trying to find my way, trying to learn the systems. My initial title was VFX concept artist at Riot Games. I wasn't even a VFX artist, and no one knew what that meant, and they kind of just figured it out. They tried figuring it out, but it wasn't working until finally I got some advice from a coworker. He's like, just make some effects. Just make some effects and ship them. You'll love it. You'll be good. And I was like, yeah, maybe I will. And so I started doing that, and then I just never went back, and they changed my title to just VFX artist instead. And I had a lot of fun. Honestly, I think I made like 20 skins in a year, and then a couple of champions after that. And then I went to R&D, and I just kind of bounced all over for about 6 years. And I just loved it. The growth was so fun. And it was challenging for me, though, diving into a more technical skill set. But I embraced it head first, and I wasn't afraid. And I was able to work on some cool stuff with some cool people as a result. So another nice thing about having the drawing skills was moments like this when we were working on Camille. We're like, okay, we want to do like HexTech Magic, right? It's kind of this like crystal-based technology magic that has a really cool, sleek vibe to it, and we want all of her spells to reflect that. And so I was hearing different things from people. I was hearing circuitry, I was hearing crystals, I was hearing like, Art Deco patterns and all these other crazy things. And I was like, maybe I should just do some quick sketches to see if we're all thinking the same thing. And what's funny is I showed this image on the left to the team early on. It just took me, like an hour or less to just sketch it out and just do a quick thing. And it saved so much pain and so much frustration. So having those art skills to just like show them, what are you talking about? What do you want this leg swipe to be? Really helped us get aligned and have a really productive discussion to save us a lot of pain later on. And so I'm very glad that I have those art skills to rely on in times like this when I'm working on something that would take much longer to build in full 3D, fully finished, than it would take just to sketch it out. So you're going to find on your journey that there's lots of different ways to come into it. Like I said, Gabriel has his whole journey that he went through being more technical into the artistry later. I had mine, which was opposite. And different games need different things, right? And it's okay to compensate for one with the other in your skill set. And games themselves do this, right? They lean into one or the other depending on what the goals of the project are. And this is, of course, evidenced by just the infinite amount of reference that you can pull. There's so much cool stuff out there. I think it's all awesome, not just the stuff that leans more heavily artistic. Things like, a character dissolving into smoke and it's like all lit and casting shadows under the environment. It feels very believable and realistic and really epic and magical. Like, to me, that's just as awesome and satisfying as the bomb from Breath of the Wild or, any of the really magical wispy stuff of Ori, or of course the insane team fights in League of Legends where it's just nuts. But yeah, so I guess what I'm trying to say is every VFX artist is unique, and I think that's a very good thing.
I do agree. And so we've seen a lot of things here in detail, and so we'll try to keep up a bit more in the as we go on. So we've seen the origin story of what it's like to be a VFX artist. Where did they come from? So now let's look at how do we go from the first VFX to the first job. So on our journey to become a VFX artist, the first thing we need to look at is transferable skills. As we said before, what do we have that we can use as a stepping stone to learn the other skills that are needed to be a VFX artist? So it's really important to lean into those, especially because it gets you motivated. New artists that are trying to learn need to keep that motivation going. So leaning into those transferable skills is very important to keep that comfort zone going and to learn skills one after the other instead of having to learn everything at the same time. So we like to separate the journey into two distinct phases. First of all, learning the skills and then finding a job. It's never possible to completely take them away, but it's good to try and keep them as far as possible. So first off, you're looking into learning. The goal here is to get a skill level that's as close as possible to a professional entry level. So there, you need to learn all the different tools you want to choose, and then to learn the artistic skills and the fundamentals you'll need, possibly the math, all those things. We'll see those in a second. And then the second part will be finding a job. So showcasing your skills through a few ambitious, polished projects that often benefit from a lot of feedback. And then finding the skill, job hunting, networking, all those things. So let's get into it.
So we showed these images earlier. I won't spend too much time here. If you have any questions, by the way, we're going to leave a little bit of time at the end, but also you can follow up with us. We'll be leaving our contact information. It's also available on the site, or you can find us online. But choosing the right tools, like I would just say, just pick one. Pick one to start, one game engine, one modeling software, one painting software, one tablet. Like, there's pros and cons to each, and you could overthink any of these. At the end of the day, basics matter the most, and the craft of what you're doing and the skill to be able to use it matters more than what you're using specifically. You can make beautiful things with everything that's on the screen, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So getting into what those fundamentals are, this is where I want to spend a little bit more time to sort of describe what exactly we're talking about when we mean fundamentals. So this is some content from our class. By the way, we've been showing stuff all along the way. A lot of it's from our students. A lot of it is from our course content. We really, really have a lot of fun over on our Discord channel as well. Like, there's a lot more stuff that I wish we could share with you, but it wouldn't fit in 1 hour. But anyway, so here's an assignment where the goal is to make this explosion, right? And David Shevlin did such a great job diagramming it, figuring out, okay, planning phase, again, he also relies on his artistry skills as he's developing this to have a nice outcome to help educate the rest of us. I'm a student to him as well on how to create this explosion. So there's a lot that goes into learning the animation principles. There's a lot of great talks out there about the animation principles and how they apply to effects. I've got a series that I did on our YouTube channel. You can check that out. And yeah, basically it's the art of VFX. And then if you just Google that, you'll probably find it. So, all right, there's basic animation principles. Then there's things like color and composition, which is so important. Figuring out which of these palettes works for the goals of the thing that I'm doing, right? Like, do I want it to be really moody? Do I want it to be really bright and happy? Which colors are going to work together? Which colors are going to fight against each other? This is something that as a student, you really need to spend a substantial amount of time studying and practicing with and referencing other things that you really like and trying to copy other color palettes. That's probably the one biggest piece of advice that I would give when you're studying color is to look at what other visual effects artists have done and try and emulate that. If you don't know how to recognize good color, ask someone who does, right? Like maybe you know somebody who's a painter or has a really good sense of color and say, hey, like, is the color on this interesting? Is it good? Is it successful? And if so, then you know you have good reference for you to copy. Because of that slide that we showed earlier where the demand in the industry is so crazy high and there's not enough schools or no schools literally that are actually focusing on this, a lot of us visual effects artists never get professionally trained on color. And so oftentimes you want to look to like painters, illustrators, that kind of discipline to get an idea of what good color is and how you can do it in your work. We're also doing a lot, obviously this is from the class as well, we're doing something as well to try and fill this gap and start teaching it in a formalized way. But there's a lot to teach here, so definitely in the meantime, you can rely on more generally available content. Then, of course, there's painting skills. Here's like some of our student work. These are a lot of really amazing people. A lot of them had jobs previous to taking the content. Some of them didn't actually, and they ended up doing a really amazing job. So you can see here that color plays a big part, but also rendering and painting skills is massive. Like that stuff that I showed you in my sketchbook, it's those countless hours of pen mileage that pay off to be able to allow you to create this kind of beautiful art. And with just a little bit of good guidance, you can get all the way that you need to go. All right, then there's shaders. I love this aspect of it. I was surprised when I first started creating shaders at Riot Games. I didn't think I would like it because it was so overwhelming and complex. But as I was putting this together, this is like kind of a team effort that we did here. But as I was putting the skeleton of this shader that you see here together, I was having so much fun because I was taking everything that I had learned and I was putting it down and writing. You can see we have everything commented. And this shader is actually available on our website. It's something that we offer for free because I figured I didn't want people to go through the same pain that I went through learning shaders. And so I made a nice clean one for you to go in and dissect and see how it works. It's built for beginners so that when you're actually using it, it's not so overwhelming and it's not so tricky to use. But definitely building shaders is a ton of fun and it's a big part of what you do as an effects artist. And then there's rendering. And rendering could mean a lot of things. Here we're just talking about like, what's the final quality of it? What's the style that it's going to fit in? What's the vibe that you want? Like what kind of materials are going to use? What kind of post-process? What kind of lighting? All of those knobs that you can push and pull that tend to be more technical, but also have a massive impact on what the final result of your effect is. This is a lesson where we actually explore this topic in After Effects, which is another tool that we use sometimes as effects artists. I feel like we just use every tool under the sun, but this is a fun case study on like, what if you made it like this? And it's the same base asset, but then it's rendered completely differently. So yeah, that's some of the fundamentals for you to be learning as you are transitioning from first being introduced to effects to trying to get that first job.
Yeah, that makes you just feel all the different things to learn. There's so many different elements, and the most important thing is that you don't need all of them. You can focus on like one of them and know a bit of everything, and you'll be fine, and you'll have a lot of fun, and you can find a job with that. I think that's incredible. Anyway,
That's true. That's very true.
Once we're done with that, we've got all our skills. Well, we're still learning, but we've got enough skills to find a job. now we need to showcase them to try and find a job. So the first job, we don't have any other projects to show. So we have to create a portfolio from scratch. So it's usually 2, 3, 4 good effects. There's a lot of resources online to really make great portfolios, to what are the do's and don'ts and everything. We're not going to go too much into that. But one very important thing for portfolios is that portfolios is not training. You're making a portfolio. You're making a showcase of your skills at the time. That's really important. And so on that showcase, one of the biggest elements that will make it great is feedback. So networking and knowing how to quickly use video recording and how to ask feedback, because that's actually a skill, to ask feedback. All that is really important. Because if you are asking feedback and I just post something and someone just gives me a heart, then I'm at the same spot as before. I'm not going to polish it. If I ask, hey, I'm doing this, I made this one, this effect, I'm looking for specific feedback on the timing, especially on the build-up. And you're going to get way more and often very detailed feedback. So that's a very, very important skill to get. So again, training is the gym, portfolio is the race. It's really important to try and keep those as far as possible, especially when you're starting. Don't start with the massive project with animations and gameplay and everything. Just start simple with small projects. So we have a portfolio, and now we're looking for the first job. Not gonna lie, the first job is often the hardest, and that bar to get the first job is actually really high, even though there's not that many artists, as we saw, or there's a higher demand than there are artists. It's also because the studios don't really take chances on new artists, or because, as we explained, they often have 1 or 2 artists, so they don't have the bandwidth to actually have someone to train in-house. So it's harder to take chances. And then, of course, networking here will be very key. Since it's small teams, everyone wants to work with someone they know, someone they think they'll be comfortable with working. And of course, the first one is the hardest. And that's where we come back to having VFX as being the second job you get, the second profession you try to do. You're already in the games industry, you want to transition to VFX. It's way easier to find the first job because that experience is key. It does everything.
So after you get your first job, it's important to remember a few things. And here we have this beautiful example of a portfolio piece. This is Colin's Bear. This is an infamous animation portfolio. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a meme. But anyway, having a good portfolio is super critical because you might get into a job that is very great for you and you grow a ton and you gain all these new skills. And then something happens, like life happens for whatever reason. You find that, now you're looking for new employment and moving on from that job a couple of years later, and your portfolio still looks the same as it did when you first got that job, and it shows none of your growth. It shows none of the new things you can do. And from a personal level, you might look back on it and feel like it looks like this demo reel and it looks this terrible and you just feel awful. So don't do that to yourself. Update it along the way. You are working for a studio. They can only give you so much in pay and in other benefits. Something that you need to make sure that you're getting from them is your own career advancement. And you get that primarily by showcasing your skills in a portfolio. I know a lot of things are not allowed in portfolios publicly because it's a non-disclosure agreement, but maybe you can get an advocate in your manager or somebody who can help let their leadership know, like, hey, this is actually really important that this person gets recognized for their skills. Is there anything we can do? Effects usually don't violate any kind of big thing. I mean, honestly, like taking an effect out from its context of the characters and the environment, it doesn't really spoil much. It just showcases what you're able to do. So do anything you can. I've always done everything I can. I've had these conversations myself because it's been important to me to be able to keep giving me the opportunities to get where I need to go from job to job and in the industry. So keep your portfolio fresh. That's important. Also consider relocation. It's not always easy to move, and nowadays that's kind of nice because you don't always need to move. You have the option of working from home with a lot of studios now. This is really shifting, and we'll see how it continues to evolve in the coming years. But it's one of the kind of nice side effects that's come out of the past year is now a lot of us get to work from home, which can also increase productivity in many ways. And it also allows studios to recruit from overseas and other places that they couldn't before. Keep on learning. That's important. I think I can't stress this one enough. I think this probably used to happen more, and I don't see it happening as often now. But there was a time when people would age out of the industry at like age 40. So it was kind of like, oh, you're 40? That's old, because there's so many new people coming out of school with really amazing and fresh art skills that they would sort of take the jobs of the older generation. I think nowadays, with seeing where effects is at least, I can speak to that, with being in such high demand, people in their 30s and 40s, they're really called upon to be leaders and like supervisors and principal effects artists to mentor the new incoming effects artists. And it's so important that you keep up with the demands because the tide is shifting. We are doing everything we can to create new talent coming in. And so it's more important than ever, if you want to stay current with all of the tech and tools that we have, that you keep on learning. And then, of course, soft skills. This is everything that does not involve making effects, right? How do you communicate? How do you work with a team? What's your general demeanor? Are you generally agreeable or argumentative? And that's not to say that you shouldn't speak your mind. You definitely should, but there is a way to do it that you can win people over, right? How to Win Friends and Influence People is the classic book on this. It's like you can't control other people being what they're going to be, whether they're going to be kind or mean or demanding or whatever, but you can have influence on them by exercising a few key soft skills. So really encourage you to work on that if that's not your strong suit. I know some of us nerds, we have trouble with talking to people, so we should probably invest in that, and I think that's very critical. So yeah, those are some of the things to think about when advancing your career in VFX.
All right, so now we're advancing, and we'll go a bit faster on those because of time, but they're a bit redundant with the first ones, but we're in VFX, and we want to know where we can go now. So one first option is to specialize. We can go either large projects, small projects, we can go pure VFX, or we can generalize and use that only as a part of our skill set. We can also go to lead positions and try and get a grander picture, having a more influence over projects, but being less in the craft, of course. Or we can pivot and branch out. One of the closest ones, as we said, with the transferable skills, is probably something like technical artists and technical animators. Those have the same 50-50 of art and tech. There are also a lot of overlapping skills that can be used. 2D animators are very close because they have a lot of skills in common, mostly the animation principles. And then finally, lighting artists share a lot of the 50-50 art versus tech ratio again, but there's not that many principles that apply. All right, so what would be the future of VFX?
So this is really, like I've mentioned a few times throughout the talk, the focus that we've been working on at VFX Apprentice. Obviously, we have the stuff that we offer today. You can go check that out. But here to the right, this is just a little snippet of what we've got cooking. There's a lot of really exciting stuff coming. These days, like Gabriel said at the beginning of the talk, yeah, there's a lot to learn, but also there's never been a better time to be a VFX artist. It's not just the stuff that we're doing at VFX Apprentice. There's a whole community at realtimevfx.com There's Twitter and YouTube and so many great tutorials out there. There's just an ever-growing library of reference and inspiration. And it can be a lot to take in, but what's nice about it is that now we're starting to see some organization. This is really our mission, is to sort of distill it down into a single track that you follow from beginning to end. But that's just in the early phases, and I'm personally so excited to see where it's headed. It's been a long road to get even here, but the future is super bright. Basically, like I said, there's never been a better time to be a VFX artist.
I really agree. Yeah. So in conclusion, what did we see today? Well, first of all, VFX today has never been easier to learn, as we just said multiple times. There are so many resources online. It's really important. That's why we're repeating. But there are so many resources online. There are so many great communities to learn with, and the tools and the softwares have never been simpler to learn. Identify when a new VFX artist is coming in, identify transferable skills is probably the first step and actually a cornerstone of what's going to happen after. Seeing what can already be done, what skills they can use as the first steps to actually get into it and contribute in their very unique way into the industry. There's, as we said before, not that many VFX artists in the industry compared to the overall demand. So there's a few options here. Usually there's mentoring in the studio that helps a bit. But schools never really give the 50-50 we're looking for. And then just in general, other classes can help. And so that's where online trainings like VFX Apprentice really are the right step ahead, at least for now. There's probably going to be even more solutions in the future. That's just the first steps. And then studio don't have that many VFXs in studio right now, and that's where there's a problem of training the junior. But once we go above that small barrier, then it will unlock way more, I believe. All right. So thanks a lot for coming. That's the end of the talk. And yeah, we'll be here for questions.
Yeah, it's been awesome. Thank you so much for coming. Such a pleasure. Bye for now.